Despite the extensive media coverage today of the Murugappan family, who now want to be known as the Nadesalingams, they returned to the Western Queensland town of Biloela. There's some important issues of principle at stake here, and law, international law and Australian law, that we will ignore at our peril. It's surely no accident that the prospect of a Labor government has so far produced 2 illegal boats from Sri Lanka in just 3 weeks, after none for many years under the former government. Just as the new government has feted the Nadesalingams by offering them a visa outcome that the courts didn't grant in any judgment. Right around the world, there are literally tens of millions of people who could be tempted to risk their lives with people smugglers to get a better outcome here in Australia, if the thought that once they got here, they were allowed to stay. Some of these people are refugees. People have fled their homeland in fear of their lives. That's the definition of a refugee under international law. Others are people who hope for a better life. Who can blame them? But that doesn't make them refugees. They're economic migrants. And under the last Labor government, both types tried to enter Australia by boat. After promising to be tough on borders, Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard dismantled the Howard government's border protection regime. The temporary protection visas, the TPVs, the offshore processing and the boat turnbacks. And sure enough, the boats started coming back again. Nearly 50,000 people came on Labor's watch last time. And more than 1,000 people died at sea trying to get here because Australia had put the sugar back on the table, telling would-be illegal migrants that if you could get here, you could stay here. Now, as always with the left on this issue, like so many others, the law didn't matter so much as a one-sided view of morality. According to refugee advocates behind the endless Biloela family litigation, we're a rich country, anyone who gets here should be allowed to stay. To the advocates, anyone who has a different view is wrong. In fact, we shouldn't even want them to test their case to make them prove their claims to refugee status. They should stay anyway. That we're morally wrong as a country to even want to control our borders. But it's a country's ability to control its borders that makes it a nation. It's the very essence of sovereignty, as we've seen play out now in the Ukraine war. Here's what's not in dispute with the Biloela family. Mother and father came to Australia separately by boat. Mr. Murugappan was first found not to be a refugee in 2012. He appealed that decision, but it was affirmed again a year later. Mrs. Nadesalingam was first found not to be a refugee in 2016. Now, she appealed that too, but it was affirmed again that she was not a refugee a year later in 2017. One of the reasons why neither was found to be a refugee was that one had left Sri Lanka and returned several times despite supposedly fearful of persecution, and the other had been living safely in India for some time prior to paying people smugglers to get to Australia. From these first early judgments, both Mr. Murugappan and Mrs. Nadesalingam appealed their cases time and time again. At every single point, they were found not to engage Australia's protection obligations, found not to be refugees. From the Refugee Review Tribunal to the Federal Circuit Court to the full Federal Court, all the way to the High Court. And under Australian law, the children of non-citizens don't become citizens just because they're born here. Sure, the Nadesalingams seem to be good people that have settled well into Biloela. But that doesn't alter the fact that no one should be allowed to come to Australia illegally and then prey on sympathies via the media and exploit the courts until the government eventually surrenders and gives them what they want. I mean, no one can say they haven't been given a fair go through our courts to get their claims tested, and at every single point, their claims have been rejected, meaning that laws of this country should be upheld. If you come to Australia without a valid visa and claim asylum but fail to meet the legal test of refugee, you should go home. After they lost their High Court case 4 years ago, the Nadesalingams should have returned to Sri Lanka, just as Australia has returned another boat from Sri Lanka in recent days. The reason why this family remained in community attention all of this time, the last 4 years, is that they refused to return to Sri Lanka, and their lawyers kept the issue alive in the courts by trying to use the youngest child as a way for them to stay, either because the courts had rejected earlier the older daughter's legal bid, so they tried it on with the younger daughter. Now, the Prime Minister might have been right when he said that they are loved and wanted in the Biloela community. But he was dead wrong to state that no people should be treated in this way, because how can we have sovereign borders if people who break our rules can't be sent home? As just about every police officer will tell you, most people only obey the law because they have to. If the message from today's joyous reunion in Biloela is that boat people can't be deported, one thing is certain. This new Labor government will be no better at border protection than the last one.